Welcome to another episode of the Office Altering Hire and Empower with Molly McGrath podcast. If you're a returning listener, welcome back. If you're a first-time listener, hopefully you'll become a long-time listener. As always, I'm your show host, Molly McGrath, founder of Hiring and Empowering Solutions and creator of this revolutionary podcast. You can check us out at hiringandempowering.com. Hey, real quick, I want to give a big shout out to our premier sponsor of the Hire and Empower podcast, Legal Ease Marketing. You can check them out at legaleasemarketing.com. More of the right cases. Legal Ease was created by law and marketing professionals for law professionals, and they exist to help build solutions that give you time back. At Legal Ease, they put you first, and everything they've created is for you and yours alone. So go check out our phenomenal sponsor, legaleasemarketing.com. Hello, all. I am so excited for this very, very, very special session that we have today. Common conversation that we are having in the law firm admin boot camp on the team member side, as well as the attorney side. And this blanket term, I feel like that is just so mainstream anymore, called anxiety. You know, I hear my kids, I hear my 17-year-old, my 21-year-old, I'll hear them chit-chatting with their friends and saying, you know, oh, my anxiety. And I'm just so excited, Noel, for you to be here today. Let me give you a proper introduction. So many of you all have met Sarah Cannell, my coach extraordinaire, Noel's coach from Thought Leaders Academy. She's just amazing. And I've met so many extraordinary business owners, entrepreneurs that are really up to a game, being a thought leader in their industry and a game changer. And Noel and I are in the same Thought Leaders Academy, and hearing her speak in our open coaching sessions and our groups that we go to, very much like the Law Firm Admin Bootcamp, I'm like, oh my goodness, you're a wealth of knowledge. You have to come talk to my attorneys. And I'm excited because she has some attorney stories of her own. But Noel McWard, she owns a company called CounselingSolutionsChicago.com. And please go to I'll put the show notes and the links and everything, but you're going to want to save her website. I'm going to put it here in the show notes as well. And download her guide, Is Anxiety Running the Show? And grab your free copy of the free anxiety relief guide. I just love on the opening of your website, Noel, where it says, connect, heal, grow, thrive. And I absolutely love that. Who could not resonate with those powerful, powerful terms? So thank you. And Noel's upcoming book is going to be called Unpack
Anxiety Impact. I think Anxiety Impact will be the title, subject to change.
Subject to change. But that's what you're really working on right now. And I just would love for you to kick off. Tell us a little bit about you, and let's go dive into the 3 levels of anxiety. And today we're really going to focus on control, because that one is very, very prevalent in the legal space by and large.
Yes. Thank you. And thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here. And I had mentioned I just returned last night from a 4-day professional conference. And anxiety is something that it is the most commonly diagnosed mental health disorder in this country. And we really talked about at this conference that we're in a bit of a mental health crisis right now in this country. And the good news is we're talking about it. And it is really good that anxiety, as well as other issues, are something that people feel comfortable talking about and hopefully getting help for as well. And it's the area of specialty for me that I really focus on in my work. And I come to that both from a personal interest, just I really enjoy working with anxiety, but I also have a son who's 22 who has really struggled with significant generalized anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder for most of his life. So I've been very motivated to understand anxiety better and to help my clients, and now help clinicians through trainings I do for clinicians to better help their clients with anxiety. But my experience on the law side of things, since this is a law audience, is that another area of work that my practice does is we do mental health evaluations for immigration lawyers. And so I've worked with a lot of immigration lawyers. I've been asked to speak at a number of conferences for immigration lawyers. And the most recent time I was asked to speak was in 2019 at a regional conference for the American Immigration Lawyers Association. And I was asked to speak on their wellness panel that all of the attorneys had to attend. And the topic of the panel that I was asked to speak on was how to stay sane in an insane world. Because at that time, practicing immigration law is hard under any circumstances, but it was particularly challenging at that time. And a lot of lawyers were just really ready, just really felt like, I can't keep doing this. And, we're really questioning if they could stay in the field long term. And so that's what I was asked to come and address. And one of my really good friends who's an attorney asked me, please just don't tell us to do yoga and go for walks. Like, we really need something more than that. So I proposed talking about control and how control, which is one of I teach that there are three ways in which anxiety manifests, or three main causes of anxiety, and that when you understand what those three causes are, understand what they look like, and understand the unique solutions to each of them, you can get better control over your anxiety. And control is one of the three main causes, and it is, as you said, something that I really see both is as a trait that many people who are drawn to law, possess, as well as that the profession of law really requires people to take on ways of thinking that manifests in anxiety. So that's what I really talked about in that panel discussion.
Before we go into the three levels and then dive a little bit deeper into control, I love what you said, because where anybody listening to this can resonate with, I don't know how much longer I can do this. And, especially when you have like when you spoke at the immigration, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe in our previous conversation, that was at the height of the pandemic, right?
It was pre-pandemic, but it was at the height of an administration that was making practicing immigration law particularly challenging. So that was the sort of unique circumstance of the time that people were in. But the pandemic definitely has, we have seen a huge growth in anxiety since the pandemic, and it definitely has been a big contributing factor to increases in anxiety, for sure.
And your solution's not going to be go take yoga class, sit in silence for 8 hours while your email is blowing up.
Right.
And I would assert it's probably not going to be, you know what, you're right, you should hang it up. You should stop doing this, because one of my favorite coaches told me, you're either running from or you're running to. So if you shut down the law practice, you're like, I can't do this anymore, or what have you. I would assume, you're still going to take wherever you go, there you are, right?
Absolutely.
So it's about how to deal with it.
Yes. And understanding for each person really where the anxiety is coming from. That's where I talk about the three main causes, and that each of them has these unique features to them. Each of them present in unique ways. Each have unique solutions. And so there's a lot that I teach about those causes and how you can work with them.
What are the three different areas? Let's dive.
Yeah. So the three are, I'd like to sort of just start out by, first of all, normalizing anxiety, that we all experience anxiety, and it's actually part of, it's wired into our brain and into our nervous system as a way of keeping us alive. It has a very important and biological purpose to it. It's our warning system, and it's the thing that triggers us into, we've all heard of fight, flight, or freeze. And it's the thing that propels us into action to keep us safe and keep us alive when we are truly in danger. The problem is that this system that we have that is really well suited to help our survival, it can't tell the difference between a problem or a danger, I should say, that's real, and one that our mind tells us exists. It can't tell the difference. So as long as our mind perceives danger, our body is going to respond the way it was designed to respond, and that's anxiety. And the problem that we now face is that many of us experience anxiety when we're not in any real danger. And so it's coming from a perception of threat or danger that doesn't exist, that's not real. And there can be these habitual ways that we have of thinking about things or seeing things that create that sense of danger, that create that anxiety that we feel. So the three ways are, the first one is catastrophizing or future catastrophizing. That's where we're in a situation where we have a certain set of facts available to us and we make up a story about something catastrophic or terrible that's going to happen. And then we relate to that story that we made up as if it is going to happen or what's likely to happen. So an example of that would be if I wake up and I have a headache and I immediately start to think, what if it's cancer and a brain tumor and I have to have surgery and I end up disabled or I die? That would be an example of catastrophizing. A client who never got any poor evaluations at work, never was in any way threatened with losing her job, but anytime her boss spoke to her in a sharp way or seemed impatient, she would immediately become convinced, I'm about to get fired. And she would call her wife and say, I'm going to get fired. So it's jumping to those stories or those conclusions that are catastrophic, that are not supported by the facts of what we know. So that's one way that we create anxiety. I usually talk about control second, but I'm going to jump over it and talk about the other one so we can come back to control, which is where we're really going to spend our time today. And the second one is distorted beliefs. And a distorted belief is, by definition, something that we believe to be true that's not true. And we can have distorted beliefs about all kinds of things, but typically if we're going to have anxiety that comes from distorted beliefs, and it also can create depression, the distorted belief that we have is typically about ourselves. And so we believe something to be true about ourselves that's not true. And that belief creates feelings of anxiety. So common examples of that are, I'm a failure. I had a client who everything that she did, she was convinced was a failure when the facts did not support that, but she had this distorted belief of being a failure. So it can be, I'm a failure, I'm unlovable, there's something fundamentally flawed about me. For people who have social anxiety, they have this belief that people are judging them and are thinking that what they're going to say is stupid or weird or awkward. An example that I give that is really clear for everyone is a person who has anorexia, though there are other factors involved in that, all share a distorted belief about their weight, where they, no matter what the weight number on the scale is or what they see in the mirror, what they believe is I'm fat or I'm heavy, even if they're dangerously thin. So distorted belief creates anxiety. And with distorted belief, we all develop, if we believe something about ourselves to be true that's not true, then we also develop behaviors that serve to compensate for that thing that we believe to be true. And those behaviors often become problematic as well and can perpetuate anxiety. So when we're talking about distorted belief, we're interested in what that false belief is. We're interested in correcting it, because if it's by definition is not true, then something else actually is true. Imposter syndrome, which I'm sure many people feel, is a distorted belief. And then we also look at the behaviors that people engage in because they believe this thing to be true that's not actually true. And then there's control. And control, this one it takes a little bit longer to explain. On a very surface level, one thing that's true for every one of us is in every situation that we're in, there are always going to be things about that situation that are in our control. And there's always things that are not in our control. Examples of things that are not in our control are what somebody else thinks, what somebody else feels, what somebody else is doing, why they're doing what they're doing. Acts of nature can be outside of our control. There are many things that are always going to be outside of our control. In fact, in most situations, there's probably going to be more things that are outside of our control than things that are actually in our control. The things that are in our control are what I think, how I choose to react to what's happening, and the behaviors that I engage in. So those are the things that are in our control. When we overattend or put too much of our energy, so that can be our mental energy, our physical energy, our emotional energy, on the things that are not in our control, we are going to be anxious. We're going to be depressed because we're putting all of our energy in something that we simply do not have the power to change or even influence. And we end up feeling exactly what we are, disempowered. We feel victimized. And it doesn't feel good, and it keeps us feeling stuck, and it can create anxiety. And all that attention that we're putting on the things that we can't control is attention that we're not putting on the things that we can. And so, for some people, this simply happens as a function of over-attending to what's not in our control and under-attending to what is in our control. And so we always want to shift our focus away from the things that we can't control and find a place of acceptance around those things. Acceptance is not that I like it. Acceptance is not that I think it's okay. Acceptance is not that I think this is fair. It's just recognizing this is something I do not have the power to change. And so I'm going to make peace with that and just focus on the things that are in my control, which is where we're empowered, which is where all of our resiliency, all of our effectiveness lies in putting our attention on what's in our control.
And go over those areas of what we're in control of again. So
sure.
Yeah, go for it.
I don't like to say what I feel because I don't think we're in control of what we feel. We feel what we feel. So I don't throw that one in there. But what we think, what we decide to do in response to circumstances that are happening around us, how we choose to act. So it's those things that are in our control. The actions and choices that we make and take, and how we think about what's happening.
It's so go for it.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. I was going to go on, but please go ahead.
Yeah, I you're probably going to go here, but talking about attorneys. So, I mean, I love this story real quick. Tell about your father was an attorney, right?
Yes.
And how the people in this program, the support team members that come, always. So the attorney might be freaking out because we just got a complaint from a client, or we dropped a deadline, or we just lost a client, or, whatever it might be. And I think our knee-jerk reaction is just to swarm in. Usually it's not very pretty, and we'll try to just white knuckle it and try to control it, and it makes things worse. And I'm constantly teaching the team, you need to be that safety net. Your attorney needs that and depends on it, because we're going to be who we are and go into our patterns. But the goal is that we surround ourselves with people that have the courage to name it and help us. And, even having fun with it, like you're being a control freak right now, or you're freaking out, go take a walk, or we got this, or what do you need to do to punch it out and calm down so we can come up with how we want to respond versus react to this. But tell the team members here, your dad.
Yeah. So my father, he's now retired, and he's been retired for a long time, but he was an attorney. And I will also add, my father is a wonderful person. He has a heart of gold. He's one of the best people you will ever meet. And he is intimidating, and he's gruff in his, in his approach. And he's got a very deep, booming voice. And he also does not realize how intimidating he is to other people. So he's sort of blind to that. And he had a legal secretary who worked for him for many, many years. And I realize now that she was significantly younger than him, because he retired at, I want to say, 20 years ago, and she still works at the firm. So she was quite a bit younger than him. And they had a really, really nice relationship. And she had a way, and it always amazed me when I was younger that she was brave enough to do this, but my father actually really loved it. If he spoke to her too gruffly, or was not nice enough in how he was asking for help from her, she would just imitate the way that he called her name. And so she would take on this very deep voice, and she would say, Kim, and just like say that to him. And he always knew when she did that he was being too gruff, and he would smile and, sort of take it as like an affectionate poke at him, and he would adjust his way of speaking to her. So I always admired that she, was able to just sort of let him know in this humorous way that he needed to speak a little nicer to her, or be aware of how he was speaking to her.
I love that. So team members listening, I really want you to take that on, have fun with it. And because I would assume if I was the boss or the attorney or the leader and my team member did that to me and kind of giggle at it and poke fun, it just diffuses a whole situation. Like, this is not, we do not have a saber-toothed tiger chasing us, or, it's not life or death. Let's calm down. Let's have a little fun. Let's de-energize this, and let's talk about what is it that we need to do next.
Yeah. So absolutely. And if you can find a way to do that, humor is wonderful if you can do that, if you can speak to it directly. And that is also, a great thing to do. But finding some way, it's just don't suffer in silence with it, and not find some way of addressing it.
Yeah. Yes.
Can I go back to control though, and say a bit more about that? Because, I said that the what's in our control, what's not in our control is the surface. And there's sort of a much deeper way that control manifests that I think shows up a lot in the law profession. And it starts with something that many people who show signs of anxiety around control are not even aware of. And it starts with a baseline feeling state or belief about the world that I'm not going to be okay, or things are not going to be okay. So it starts with this baseline, which many people are not even aware that they have. I'm not going to be okay. I'm not okay. Things are not going to be okay. And then people then develop two ways of compensating for that, or going through the world so that they can feel like I'm okay, or things are going to be okay. And they do that in one of two ways. The first is by trying to control as much of their external environment as they possibly can. And this is people that we can all think of, people who are very rigid in their expectations of how things should be done. People who want things done a particular way, and, need things to be done a particular way, that are trying to make sure that everything outside of them looks a particular way. So we see with this a lot of rigidity around how things should be done. We see a lot of over-researching, over-preparing for things, because and that comes from not having a sense of where the line of good enough is, where things are going to be okay. And so there's always this feeling of, I need to research more, I need to prepare more in order for things to be okay, in order for things to turn out okay. And so we see this in people who can be very rigid in their thinking and their expectations, because their unconscious thought process is that if everything out here looks the way that I think that it should, or the way that I want it to, or if I can predict what's going to happen because I'm making sure everything happens the way I want it to, then I'm going to be okay. It doesn't work though, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So that it doesn't work. It is a flawed solution, but it is how people try to compensate and convince themselves that things are going to be okay. The other thing that people do is that they anticipate everything that could go wrong and have a plan ready for what they're going to do if and when that thing happens. So there's a tremendous amount of mental energy that goes into constantly thinking about all the things that could go wrong, coming up with a plan. People who do this tell me all the time that it's exhausting, because it is exhausting. And it also does not work. The reason that trying to control our environment doesn't work goes back to the first thing that I said, is that there are always going to be things that are not in our control, and we will never be successful at controlling our environment and making sure everything happens the way that we want it to or think that it should. But the bigger problem with it is that it's also a way in which we're externalizing our ability to be okay. we're making our ability to be okay completely dependent on things that are happening outside of us, instead of recognizing that my ability to be okay resides within me and all of the internal resources that I possess, as well as the external resources that I have. And so it's taking my sense of being okay away from in here and externalizing it to out there. And that's a problem. That's also true of people who are trying to anticipate everything that could go wrong and make a plan for it. But the reason that one doesn't work is none of us are fortune tellers, and none of us can ever accurately predict what's going to happen in the future or details of things that will go wrong. Things will go wrong. That's a guarantee. Things will go wrong. And when they do go wrong, we all are in the same position that we have to figure out what to do about it based on the facts that are available to us at the time that that thing happens. And we will never be able to accurately predict all those facts. So all of the planning that we make for the things that could go wrong, generally, we will never use them. And I ask people all the time, when you think about all the plans you've made for all the things that could go wrong, how often have you actually used those plans because the thing you predicted and planned for happened? And the answer to that question is virtually always never or almost never. And then when I ask when things have go wrong, because if you think about the worst things that have happened to you and the hardest circumstances that you've had to deal with, how many times were you prepared and had anticipated that that was going to happen and had a plan ready for what to do? And the answer to that question is always never.
Never.
And never. Now, when I say all this, though, I recognize that the law of field does demand people to anticipate what could go wrong and have a plan ready. And so that's a real challenge for people who are in the law profession and for lawyers in particular, because the job requires you to think that way. It's really hard to think that way just as work and then turn it off and go home and not think that way. And I understand that it has some utility for sure in the legal profession, though probably not as much as utility as we think that it does. And the other problem with it is that it has our focus overly oriented towards things that could go wrong and problems. And of course, what we focus on is what we see. And so it also creates this experience for people where they're much more attuned to problems and negatives than they are to what's working or positives. And that really affects kind of all aspects of a person's being when that's, when our focus is overly attuned to the negative. So there's some real challenges that come with being in the legal profession that I just want to name and recognize are real.
I love that you said that because, we have a comment in here. The second version, coming up with a plan for every possible negative scenario. And if we're used to externalizing it, how do we shift and try to internalize it instead? And you're right, in the legal profession, but I love what you said. You really, truly do have to be prepared, and you do have to be overly prepared by and large if you're going to trial. But you said something that really hit me, because as you're talking, I'm like, yeah, but there is some truth to that for legal space. But here's the deal. When I talk to attorneys, 2% of their actual cases go to trial. You're always preparing for trial. Right. You're always preparing for the courtroom and each step in the process that gets you to the place of either settlement or going to trial. But you said something really, really key. Let's take that fact pattern, 2 to 5%. Let's even put it on the heavy side, 5%, which is pretty heavy for most law firms, even criminal defense defense may be a little higher, but
right.
So you have 100% of your mental space, your time, your energy. And if you're, like you said, you can't switch it on and off. Now, you do want to be prepared, but there's a fine line of over preparing and always preparing for the worst. So if you keep I'm just even thinking, if that's your go-to, how it could just really cause your anxiety to be through the roof, be your default, but then also how it would impact like your turnover with your team. It would impact probably all your other pieces of your life other than that 5% called trial and preparing for the worst. But I think what I love what you just said is, if you focus on the negative, you're going to constantly get more negative, right?
That's right. That's right. And that's what you're going to see. What we focus on is what becomes our experience. And so if we're always focused on, the negative, then that becomes our experience of life and of the world. And recognizing that, again, like we do have some choice and control over what we choose to focus on. And, I think that it becomes, and again, recognizing that the law firm or the law profession does demand this of people. It's a requirement of the job. And, so I recognize that that is a real challenge, but it's when you're aware of that, you can more consciously make choices about how you use your time, what you focus on. And, there was the question of how do you shift that, to the internal. So, and that's the work. And that can be, that can be quite a process, but I'll answer it and I'll give an example around this. It really is about starting to recognize what are all the internal resources that you have that you can fall back on and that you rely on that make you successful. Because the thing that's true about the control area of anxiety is that the people who engage in this, and particularly the anticipating what could go wrong and having a plan for it, are really committed to that this is why I'm successful. They really believe that that's what makes them successful. And I promise it's not. What makes you successful is you. And the you that makes you successful are things like your intellect, the way you think about things, your problem-solving skills, your analytical abilities, your body of knowledge, your experience,
your relationship building,
because your external resources, and those are equally important. External resources are your network around you. It's when I don't know how to do this, who can I go to? Like, who can I ask for help from? And the better the quality of those relationships and the more of them you have, the more resources that you have when you need help, because we all need help with things sometimes. None of us can solve every problem all by ourselves. External resources can also be access to information. It can be money, if that is, something that can help solve a problem. So we want to be able to recognize that our success comes from the internal and external resources that we possess, and not the planning for disaster that we do. An example that I give this example because I think it's such a good one, and then I will share how this came up in work with an attorney that I was working with. I had a client a number of years ago who was in academia, and she was on tenure track at a university. So there was legitimately a lot of pressure on her. There was a lot that she had to do. The stakes were high. I mean, so all of that was valid and real. And she came to therapy because of anger. She was, she said, I'm just angry and irritable all the time. And when we started looking at what that was about, what it was really about was anxiety. And so one day she came into my office and she was just enraged with her dean. And she told me, he called me into his office and he gave me another task to do. And I do not know how he could possibly expect me to do this on top of everything else that I'm already doing. And she was just absolutely enraged and convinced, like, I just simply cannot add one more thing to my plate. So I asked her to tell me all the things that were on her plate. Like, what are all the things that are expected of you and that you have to do? And she went through everything. And one of those things was teaching undergraduate courses. And so then I asked her, how much time do you spend preparing for each of those classes? And she told me she spent 4 hours preparing for each individual class that she taught, each session of a class, which I was teaching the graduate school at the time. And so my perspective on that was like, that's a lot of time to spend preparing. So I started asking her more questions about that. Is this a class you've taught before? She said, yes. Is it a subject matter that you feel comfortable with? She said, yes, it's what I did my dissertation on. How are your student evaluations? And she said, they're great. I get really excellent student evaluations. And so I said to her, I don't think you need to spend 4 hours preparing for each class. And when I told her that, she really argued back with me at first because she was convinced that the reason she was successful as a teacher was because of the preparation she put in before her classes. And what I said to her was, it's not the preparation. It's you. You already possess everything that you need to be successful teaching this class. You have the knowledge. You know this material. You've taught the class before. I mean, you have a comfort and a facility with this material that is inside of you. You don't need to prepare for it. Your teaching style is why you're successful. That's why you get such great evaluations from the students. You will lose none of that if you prepare less for the class. So I convinced her to try to reduce her preparation time. And I was just going to start slowly easing it back. I was going to ask her to go from, can we go from 4 hours to 3 hours? And we're going to work our way back. She came back a few weeks later, and on her own, she just took this idea and ran with it. And she told me that she was now preparing 15 minutes or less for each class. And when I asked her, how are you doing? She said, great. They feel just as good to me as the 4-hour classes. And then when she, at the end of the semester, got her student evaluations, they were just as good. And so she needed to be willing to trust that, I maybe can prepare less. And then she just, like I said, ran with that idea and saw that I actually am doing just as well preparing 15 minutes or less as I was doing when I prepared 4 hours.
Wow.
So, and to me, that was a profound, demonstration of the principle. And I shared that with a client of mine who is an attorney. He's a litigator. He works on very, very high power, big money corporate litigation cases. He also is extremely successful and very young. So he was in this very unique situation of finding immense success at a very young age. And he was just filled with anxiety, and he got maybe 4 hours of sleep a night because he told me that the reason he believed he was successful was because he spent so much time thinking about his cases and outthinking his opponents. And I didn't want to fully discount that played no role whatsoever. So I allowed that may have something to do with it, but I promise you that is not the main reason that you are as successful as you are. And again, went through it's the way he thinks about things. It's his intellect. It's his analytical skills. It's his work ethic. It's, his knowledge. It's having people that he can go to when he's not sure about something and point him in the right direction. And he really pushed back on this. I mean, he was really convinced that there was no way he could spend less time and still be successful. Now, I was seeing him in couples therapy. He went to a different therapist for individual therapy, but he worked on that with the individual therapist. And he really did succeed at reducing significantly the amount of time that he spent just mentally thinking about and working on his cases. I mean, he would laugh to me and say, oh yeah, I'm over that now. I'm doing so many things at the last minute. He started running again. He had completely neglected self-care. So he got back into running. He runs marathons now. He got season tickets for one of the local sports teams. It was going to games. He was able to create some more balance in his life, and he was still just as successful as an attorney.
Wow. Oh my, is this the attorney that you told me about with his wife and the simple shift that he made?
Yeah.
I think for 2 seconds, I love that, because at the end of the day, when you let go and you can relax and you, again, going to the internal and really asking yourself, what makes me, and everybody's definition of success, but when you're really spinning to your point, that I'm a really good active listener. I'm a really good relationship builder. I am very, I know my content. I know my craft. I know my area of law. I know what have you. And it allows you to just kind of to answer the question and really shift and try to internalize it, as you can try to outrun it the whole time. But a lot of times what you're outrunning is your own energy, your relationships. And, at the end of the day, what I'm hearing you say, like, no matter what goes wrong, because it will go wrong when something goes wrong, how you respond to it and get deeply curious about it and lean on the people, your team or what. So we missed a deadline. Okay, well, let's pause and figure out why we missed a deadline. Breakdown in process, production, whatever, communication, what have you. But you're never not going to miss a deadline. You're never going to not upset a client or what have you, but it's how you respond to it, right?
Absolutely. And if you, and again, there's always exceptions. And so part of this is being able to discern the difference between the times when I actually really do need to put the time and effort in and times when I don't, so I think about knowing what you are really good at, like all the things that you just said. So I don't need to expend all kinds of time and energy on those things, but there are other parts of maybe what I'm being asked to do that I don't feel as confident in, or I don't feel as skilled in, and that's where your energy goes. But it's also true that a lot of times, like if we miss a deadline or, something of that nature, sometimes there are real consequences. Often there really aren't. And, so we also don't want to catastrophize the consequences if something goes wrong, because things do go wrong and there's a lot of room for things to go wrong. We're never going to be able to prevent, everything, make sure everything goes exactly the way that we want it to. So we also want to be aware of not catastrophizing, because most of the time those things are fixable.
Yeah. Tell us real quick a story about the attorney that you just spoke of. High successful, very young. Outran every expectation. And let's have a conversation about the shift you saw in appreciation.
Yes, absolutely. So I really love this attorney. He's a great person. I really love him. And he also, had some traits that were, challenging to work with, both in couples therapy and also really kind of got in his way. And one of those traits is that if something did not make sense to him, he was incapable of doing something that did not make sense to him. So when we were working on things with him and his wife, if she had something that she wanted or needed from him and it didn't make sense to him, he just wouldn't do it. He just couldn't not get himself to do it. And when we were talking about that in the context of couples therapy, he told me, he said, this is not just a problem here. He's like, this happens at work too. And he volunteered that, I do love this too. He volunteered that he did not understand the concept of thanking his associates who worked under him or his support staff who worked under him for doing their job well. He did not understand why he would acknowledge that, because in his mind, that's what you're being paid for. So why would I make a big deal about it if you're, doing the thing that you're being paid to do? I will mention that I shared that with my father, and he said, I hate to admit that I used to think that way as well. So I'm guessing that they are not the only true attorneys out, who think that way. And so he was trying to figure out a way that it would make sense to him to thank his associates and staff at work for doing a good job. And he finally came around to the idea that they would be happier and it would make for a better work environment and that he would benefit from that. And so he started, and he, again, to his credit, told me it did not feel comfortable. I had to make myself do it. It felt awkward at first to do. But that he saw the more he did it, he saw his staff really respond well to it. And he saw the benefit of doing that. So the favorite part of the story though for me is like not only did he make that shift in at work, and it was actually easier for him to make that shift at work, but one of the things that his wife, who was a stay-at-home mom, and she handled everything at home with the kids, so that he literally did not need to think about anything at home, and he could go and travel and litigate these cases and be gone for weeks at a time, and she took care of everything. And the only thing that she wanted from him was just him to know all that she was doing and to appreciate what she was doing. And he really struggled with being able to do that for a long time. And we worked on this for such a long time. And so whenever he would come home from trial, it was always a very challenging time in their relationship. That's always when conflict was the highest. And one day I'm having a session with them, and he had come back from a trial, and they're both telling me that it went much better than it usually did. And they didn't get into fights, and things were much more disconnected between the two of them. And she did acknowledge that when he came home, he thanked her for everything that she had done at home. And he told me, he said, when I got off the plane with my team, I told them the first thing you're going to do when you get home is thank your partner for taking care of everything while you were gone. And I wanted to hug him when he told me that he not only had to internalize that for himself, but he also told his team that they needed to go home and do that as well.
Do you think that's part of like the going inward process of really recognizing, okay, I recognize that control is my go-to default. Yeah. But do you think that's the part of it for really flipping the switch and making this shift of going internally and looking for that gratitude and verbal appreciation?
I mean, I think that's so important. It's not the whole solution, but I think it's so important to, it's part of that entire shift away from all the things that are wrong and all the problems to, what is going right and what I appreciate. And there is a load of research out there. This is so well documented and validated by research at this time, that one of the most important things that we can do, both to alleviate depression and anxiety, is to focus on gratitude. And, gratitude journals have gotten a lot of attention. It's not just a woo-woo thing to do. There is so much research that backs it up, that because what it does is it starts orienting your mind and your focus to the things that you genuinely do feel gratitude for, that you appreciate, that you start to see the things that are good. And again, what we focus on is what we experience, and it makes an enormous difference.
Experience and expands,
Yes.
We talk a lot about that, where it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, so to speak.
Absolutely.
So what else would you say for us, Noel, in regards to really understanding, because I think many of us can appreciate this, whether we're sitting on the support staff side, where we are kind of, if you could talk to us a little bit about like when you're on the receiving end or the giving end, what we can do to just create that 2 millimeter shift, and what to do to manage your own, but also maybe when you're on the receiving end of somebody else's anxiety.
Sure. Sure. I mean, it's tough when you're on the receiving end of somebody else's anxiety. And of course it is, and I just want to, validate that. Of course you want that to change. I mean, and of course you want, the behavior to change. And so there's a few things I would say. One is, to the extent that you're able to genuinely do this, to depersonalize it. And, if it really, for example, if the way that, if you're a support staff and you're on the receiving end of a certain way of being spoken to or a certain treatment, and you can recognize, I'm not the only one that gets spoken to that way, or I'm not the only one who has these kinds of interactions with this individual, that doesn't make it okay and that doesn't make it feel good. But there's also a way that you can put it back on that person and let it be about them and not a reflection of you. And let it be, about whether it's their poor skills in interacting with,
the support staff or their anxiety or their stress or whatever that may be. Just so that you're not taking it on as meaning something about you when it really doesn't, and when it's really about them and it's a reflection of them. So I think that I have a client who works for a very, very high-powered attorney in a supporting role to him, and he does not treat her well, and he doesn't. And the way he treats her is very consistent with the way he treats lots of other people. She probably will not continue to work for him because of that, unfortunately. And she's a very, he will lose out by not having her work for him anymore. But we do a lot of talking about that's him. He's not going to, and a lot of what we work on is, accepting that he's not going to change, and then her figuring out what she needs to do in relationship to that and how she takes care of herself around that. Sometimes it's speaking up. Sometimes you do speak up and you do try to address the issue. Sometimes it's using humor. Sometimes it's... and I do have an example of her doing that as well with, she was creating a program for him there were all these people who were going to be seated at a table, and they all needed to have a little bio written about them at the table of who they were. And they were all high-powered individuals. She had compiled all the information. There was one individual, though, whose name was very, very common. And there were many people of, very high caliber known people in the city with that same name. And so she went back to her boss and gave him everything that she had created and said, I just need a little more specific information about this one individual. And he wrote back, Google it. And she, and she said to me, she's like, does he think I'm an idiot? Does he think I wouldn't have thought to have already done that? And there so happened to have been an article in the New York Times written about why are there so many with the name of the individual, the exact name of the individual that she was needing information about. And the whole article was about how there were 30 plus renowned people in the city of the same name, and that they were often mistaken for one another or misattributed for their, because, so what she did was she wrote back and she just attached the article and sent that back to him. And then he got the message and realized that, and he made a joke and sent her the information that she needed. So I think you need to find ways to work with what you have, but you also need to sort of recognize what you can and cannot change and try to work with the parts that you can. Yeah, you can change.
I love the humor. I love naming it. That's what I always teach my students of, if you're on the receiving end of a freak out of a colleague or your boss or your attorney or what have you, to do the proverbial, referee timeout, or Kim, use this. And really, truly, because I feel like paying attention to, like you said, it's not about you. Don't let it stick on you. But then also having, some healthy boundaries, and also naming it right then and there that you have a good shot at really giving the other person permission to, okay, let's calm down about this. Let's like take a deep breath, or, like my kids always say to me, take a lap. You got to take a lap. But have fun with it and trying it, because a lot of times we're unaware. I always give my team full permission that when I'm in my pattern, when I am in freak out zone or control zone or what have you, I need you. I need you to be Kim, like your dad's Kim.
Yeah.
And be able to help me to see, okay, time out. Just even and having a buzzword. I work for an attorney, and he was, like high power, very, very unaware of how he was showing up. And finally we came up with a term, and it was tone. And anytime I'd be like, tone, like right now, our entire staff's gonna walk out if you don't shift your energy right now. And it really did work. And sometimes I'd have to say it 2 times, 5 times, 10 times, but it was worth it for me because he was eventually receptive to it, number one. And I saw that it was making those 2 millimeter shifts, and I really loved the firm that I worked for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as I give these examples of like my father and this attorney that was my client, they're good people who are, they're not wanting to make their staff miserable and, are just maybe running into their own stress, their own limitations. And, if I think that more often than not, they would be interested in changing if it's going to be for the greater good and make people around them, happier, or as you said, like you're going to lose your whole staff here if you don't shift this. And of course, that's not going to be true for everybody. Not everybody is going to care, but I think that we have to, remember they're human beings also who, maybe are under a lot of pressure that we don't appreciate or we don't understand, what challenges they're facing. But I do think, and I know it can be hard to do when there's a power differential, but to be able to find a way to speak to it and to try to problem solve around it.
What do we do? Like, I'd love your thoughts on this, because a lot of times we feel as entrepreneurs or as human beings, that we can justify our stress. Like you, for example, that you did with your client. I love that. Like looking at everything on your plate and then really examining it. But I think a lot of times attorneys, entrepreneurs, we just justify like the stress is real. I'm not quote unquote making this up. Right. Any thoughts, comments, wisdom you would give to us in regards to like how to break that cycle?
Yeah. I think that the only real answer to that is to be self-reflective about it and to be honest with ourselves about it. It's interesting as you're talking about this, because I'm thinking about a podcast episode that I'd listened to. For anybody who listens to this, the podcast, We Could Do Hard Things with Glennon Doyle and her sister Amanda Doyle and Abby Wambach. And Amanda was an attorney in a past life, and they had an episode about anxiety. And in the discussion, Glennon was identifying herself as having anxiety and was saying about her sister Amanda, but yours is real because you're managing a million things and you have so much on you. And so your stress is real. You're not anxious. You just have a lot of stress. And Amanda came back and said, well, I'm not sure that that's really true, because, she recognized, she was able to own that she has her own patterns and tendencies that make her feel stressed. And yes, I have a lot on me, but she said, if I were to become a gardener, I would find a way to become the most stressed out gardener that has ever lived. And, recognizing I bring to the things that I do a certain expectation, a certain pressure I put on myself, a certain, that can be perfectionism, for example. I think it's about recognizing, like really looking inward and what are the patterns that I have around how I interact with the things that I have to do or the kind of expectations I put on myself that are contributing to me feeling so stressed out. So it's not just that I have a lot to do. I think most people have a lot to do. But it's also how do I think about those things that I have to do? Do I inherently trust I'm going to be able to get them all done and handle it? Like, that's a really good question. Do I trust I've got this and I'm going to, I'll get it done and it will be okay? Because if I don't, then that is going to be part of the energy of what I bring to all my to-do tasks. There is going to be a sense of urgency to all of them. There's going to be a sense of anxiety to all of them. I have a sense of what is good enough. I think the biggest antidote to control is about being able to really, truly internalize our sense of competence. But there's also this piece of, do I have a sense of what is good enough? And do I know when to say, I can stop now, I've done enough because this is good enough. This is going to get me the results that I want. And there's a point of, I think about the law of diminishing returns, that there is a point at which we hit good enough and we're going to get the outcome that we want, and that any additional effort we put in beyond that is not going to be met with an equal return in the outcome. And a lot of us work beyond the good enough point, whether that's coming from a sense of perfectionism, whether that's coming from a feeling of imposter syndrome and feeling like I'm fooling everybody. And if I kind of relax a little bit, the cracks will start to show and people are going to realize that I really don't have this all together, or I'm not really as good as they think that I am. So I think it does require a lot of self-reflection and being curious about ourselves and what do we bring to our to-do list. Not just what's on the to-do list.
Yeah, the energy that you're even bringing to, I love that. And a question I'd add too is asking yourself, but also, do I really trust my team or the people that are surrounding yourself? So maybe you might be like, hell yeah, I trust myself. I'm a badass, whatever it might be. But I love what you just said. I think we're afraid if we just relax and have fun with work, especially in the legal space, that the other shoe's going to drop or that all the cracks are going to show. And just to clarify real quick, when you say good enough, can you just say real quick in a few sentences what that means? We have our bar license. We have, here we come again with the justification pile.
Yeah. So what I mean by good enough is it's the antidote to perfectionism. Perfectionism is this belief that I have to do it perfectly, and if it's not perfect, it's not going to be good at all. If I don't do it perfectly, it will have no value. And so we work for the perfection. We work for where, it has to be perfect in order for it to be good enough. And the problem with that is there is no such thing as perfection. And so it creates this sense of stress and this overperforming when we have a sense of perfectionism. So the good enough is, what is the level at which I need to put effort into this, or I need to research this, or I need to prepare for this, or I need to work on this, to where it reaches that point where it is good enough. I don't need to do more. I don't need to improve upon it. It's not perfect. We're not looking for perfection because it doesn't exist. But this is going to get me, again, because we can't control everything. If somebody else were looking at this and it wasn't just my eyes looking at it, they would look at it and say, this is great. Send it off. This is great job. You're done with this. A lot of times around control, people also have a sense of perfectionism. And so they don't have a good sense of when something is good enough. For the client that I gave the example of, who's the professor or on the academia track to becoming a tenured professor, she thought that 4 hours preparation was what she had to do to be good enough as an instructor, and actually she only needed 15 minutes of preparation.
Yeah,
so it's about trying to figure out where's the threshold where I can say, enough. I don't need to keep improving upon this. I don't need to keep working on this. I don't need to keep researching it more or preparing it more.
Oh my goodness. All right. Tell our listeners, thank you so much. I know we went a few seconds over here. Tell our listeners how they can find you.
Oh, sure. So my practice is Counseling Solutions. My website is counselingsolutionschicago.com. And if there's a way to share that with in the chat, and I can share, is there a way I can share email with people through?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I can share my email as well. And thank you for having me on. This is really fun for me to talk about.
Oh my gosh, the comments. I cannot thank you enough for today. Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, I put it in the chat. I'm going to put it in the show notes as well. Go and download your free resource. I will put Noel's email in there as well. CounselingSolutionsChicago.com. Go get your free anxiety relief guide.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. All right, that's a good stopping point for us today. We've reached the end of yet another episode of the Hire and Empower with Molly McGrath podcast, where dream teams of intrapreneurs in the entrepreneurs world really do come true. Listen, whether you're a business owner, employee, executive, maybe a hiring manager, we wholly understand. Hiring, onboarding, and leadership is absolutely expensive, exhausting, overwhelming, time and energy consuming for the already taxed professional. Well, we have your back on all fronts. For 25 plus years, we have transformed over 4,000 law firm teams into becoming the most efficient, resourceful, and profitable aspect of your business. Check out our Smart Hire solution, our employee leadership program, or our 66-day law firm turnaround at hiringandempowering.com. And listen, if you enjoyed this episode, click below, subscribe, make sure that we get in your inbox, share it with your friends. And of course, a shout out, as always, to our premier sponsors at Legal Ease Marketing. Check out legaleasemarketing.com. Legal Ease was created by law and marketing professionals for law professionals. They exist to help build solutions that give you time. At Legal Ease, they put you first as a law firm owner. Everything they've created from a place of automation, technology, and marketing was created for you and is yours and yours alone. All right, that's a wrap. Again, check us out, subscribe, share with your friends. If there's something that you're really pining for us to speak about, put it below in the comments, shoot us an email, go to our website and fill out our contact form. Tell us what you want to hear more of, and we will get it on the show for you.